On the bridge collapse in Baltimore as the body of a fourth victim was recovered, trapped inside of a construction vehicle. The identity of that victim has not yet been released. 3 other construction workers who were on the Francis Scott Key Bridge have been recovered after the collapse last month. The FBI has also opened up a criminal investigation into the cargo ship that hit the bridge, causing the collapse. Federal agents have boarded the 985-foot-long ship with search warrants.
New this morning in Maryland, the FBI and U.S. Coast Guard are leading a criminal investigation into the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. According to a U.S. official, the agencies are looking into whether the crew of the Dolly failed to report an earlier issue that delayed its departure. The massive cargo ship lost power on March 26th and struck the bridge. 6 people working on the bridge fell into the river and died. The National Transportation Safety Board has been investigating why the ship lost power. The NTSB says it's focusing on the engine room equipment.
Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore is now gaining the attention of the FBI. A criminal investigation has been started by the agency. They want to learn more about what led up to the incident and if all federal laws were followed. We're also now learning the giant ship was dealing with power issues hours before leaving port. This week, officials announced a 4th body was recovered from the underwater wreckage.
Right now, the FBI is opening a criminal investigation into the ship that hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore last month, causing it to collapse. Federal agents boarded the wrecked cargo ship early this morning, armed with search warrants. A spokesperson with the FBI Baltimore office released a statement today confirming that the court-authorized law enforcement activity was taking place on board the Dolly, but they did not go into any further details. Investigators are reportedly collecting data and also reviewing events on board the Dolly in the moments before and after the crash and collapse. New this afternoon, the FBI is opening a criminal investigation into the deadly collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. The investigation is focused on what led up to the collapse that killed 6 people and whether all federal laws were followed. A cargo ship lost power and crashed into the bridge, causing the catastrophic collapse.
The FBI has opened a criminal investigation into the ship that hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore last month, causing it to collapse. Federal agents boarded the 985-foot Dolly early this morning, armed with search warrants. A spokesperson with the FBI Baltimore office released a statement confirming court-authorized law enforcement activity was taking place on the ship, but it did not go into any further details. Investigators are reportedly collecting data and reviewing events from on board in the moments before and after the crash and collapse.
Jeff Hoden, the WR Live Center. I got some brand new information here. The Washington Post is reporting, and now several other news outlets are reporting a federal criminal investigation is underway into the bridge collapse. The Baltimore Key Bridge that left several people dead. It is now under that federal criminal investigation because the FBI and the U.S. Coast Guard, as they lead this criminal investigation into the disaster, they're asking questions about whether the crew failed to report an earlier issue with that ship that delayed its departure, but they still allowed it to leave. So after the bridge collapsed and those 6 construction workers were on it and plunged into that river and died, the National Transportation Safety Board has been investigating this and what caused it, but they're also now looking into this criminally.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Photos from the Washington Post capturing FBI agents climbing up the side of the massive container ship Dolly, executing a search warrant. The ship still trapped in the wreckage of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, a month after the ship crashed into the bridge at 1:30 a.m. Late Monday, word that a 4th body has been recovered. Law enforcement sources tell NBC News the FBI is focused on whether any member of the crew had prior knowledge of the ship's mechanical problems that would make it unsafe. maritime law attorney James Power.
I understand the crew's still aboard, so they'll interview the crew. They'll probably, I would assume, coordinate with the notes of the Coast Guard and the NTSB for any investigations.
The NTSB tells NBC News its investigators are looking into reports that alarms were going off on the ship while it was still in port, suggesting a potential power problem before the ship left port.
They needed the assistance of Hyundai, who is the manufacturer of equipment in the engine room, to download data from the electrical power system and look at the circuit breakers.
Attorneys for 2 of the bridge repair workers who died and 1 survivor say the men were sitting in their cars on a break when they were suddenly thrown into the water below without warning. 2 remain missing.
Baltimore has temporarily lost a bridge, but 6 families have permanently lost irreplaceable loved ones.
The mayor of Baltimore now promising legal action against the ship's owner, the manufacturer, and operator. But the owner and manager have already invoked a law dating back to 1851 that limits their liability only to the value of the damaged ship, not the victims' families or the destroyed bridge.
This law was used to protect the owner of the Titanic. That's how ridiculous this is.
Baltimore, Maryland, where a new criminal investigation is now underway in that deadly bridge collapse. Last month, 6 people were killed when a cargo ship slammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge, destroying a major thoroughfare. As authorities work to confirm the identity of a 4th victim pulled from the river, a criminal investigation is also underway. Cole Higgins has more.
3 weeks after a massive cargo ship struck Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, authorities confirmed the body of a 4th victim has been recovered. 6 construction workers who were working on the bridge at the time of the collapse plunged into the Patapsco River and died. 2 of their bodies are still missing.
They were living the American dream, fixing America's infrastructure. Out there just filling potholes, not knowing it was going to be their last day.
Attorneys for the families of 2 of the victims and 1 survivor announcing they are conducting their own investigation into the bridge collision. The ship's owner and manager have filed a petition in federal court asking for a cap of about $43.7 million on potential liability payouts. Attorney Kevin Mahoney says the company's petition relies on an outdated law and is calling on Congress to repeal it.
The Limitation of Liability Act was passed 173 years ago, in 1851. That's about 20 years before Thomas Edison invented the light bulb.
Meanwhile, the FBI confirms the agency, along with the Coast Guard, has launched a criminal investigation into the bridge collapse, telling us, quote, the FBI is present aboard the cargo ship Dolly, conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity. The city of Baltimore also looking into who may be to blame for destroying the bridge that 30,000 Marylanders relied on every day.
Anything that we can do to help Baltimore recover from that tragedy.
I'm Cole Higgins reporting.
Now to the latest on the collapse of the Key Bridge in Baltimore. Today, the FBI confirmed it has opened a criminal investigation into that ship collision that sent the bridge crumbling into the Patapsco River.
And this news coming on the same day attorneys representing the 8 construction workers on the bridge that night announced they're taking the case. Our Scott Broom brings us up to speed from Baltimore.
Sky 9 circled the crippled cargo ship Dolly this morning as authorities, including the FBI, climbed aboard to launch an investigation into possible criminal wrongdoing that may have contributed to the collision that brought down the Francis Scott Key Bridge, killing 6 construction workers and injuring 2. The agency would not comment on any aspect of the criminal investigation. The criminal investigation comes as a team of attorneys announced this afternoon they aim to sue the owners of the Dolly. Here's lawyer L. Chris Stewart.
The families are very happy and appreciative to the federal criminal investigation that was announced today by the FBI. We all know that the more eyes to investigate, the better, especially when you're dealing with corporate giants of an industry.
Ship owner Grace Ocean Private Limited of Singapore has already filed a motion in federal court to limit their liability under an 1851 maritime law that the attorneys are calling on Congress to repeal immediately.
The Limitation of Liability Act of 1851 is unfair, It's unjust, and it serves no purpose.
6 days is what it took for Grace Ocean to go to federal court and file for protection.
It rubs salt in the wounds of these family members.
And this morning, Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott said the city is also lining up to sue Dolly's owners for damages. The ship remains tangled in bridge wreckage as the Army Corps of Engineers keeps working to open a portion of the blocked channel by the end of the month. In Baltimore, Scott Broom, WUSA 9.
The FBI now investigating last month's deadly Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore.
As Rebecca Castor reports, agents are looking into whether any ship personnel should be held accountable.
This was all preventable.
Attorneys representing the families of 2 victims and a survivor of the Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore say the construction workers received no warning before the cargo ship crashed into the bridge.
6 families have permanently lost fathers, uncles, brothers, irreplaceable loved ones.
Now the FBI is getting involved, opening a criminal investigation into the events leading up to the collapse. Agents were on board the Dolly cargo ship Monday, looking for any violations of federal maritime law and whether crew members were aware of any technical or operational issues before the ship left port.
The more eyes to investigate, the better, especially when you're dealing with corporate giants of an industry.
Days after the collapse, the ship's owner and operator denied responsibility, but filed court documents asking for any liability to be capped at $43 million. Meanwhile, the labor-intensive and dangerous process of removing the hundreds of tons of debris from the Patapsco River is still underway.
We have over 300 responders working on this, and we've had no injuries to date. We intend to keep it that way.
The FBI's criminal investigation is separate from the one being conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board to determine the cause of the collapse and evaluate safety measures. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox 32 Chicago.
Multiple investigations being opened into the deadly Baltimore bridge collapse. The city of Baltimore partnering with 2 law firms to look into that deadly collision. All of this while a federal probe has reportedly been launched. Fox 5's Lili Zhang live tonight with those details. Lili?
Marina, a representative for the FBI confirms that agents were on board the ship Dolly this morning. They did not confirm exactly what they were investigating, but we have also learned that some of the families of the victims have now hired attorneys.
Grace Ocean has temporarily lost a ship. Baltimore has temporarily lost a bridge. But 6 families have permanently lost fathers, uncles, brothers, irreplaceable loved ones. And that's what's getting lost in this entire situation. And what has been so devastating to the families in this situation is the actions of the owner.
L. Chris Stewart is a managing partner at a firm now representing the families of Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes and Jose Minor Lopez. They are 2 of the 6 men who died in the Baltimore bridge collapse nearly 3 weeks ago. The firm also represents the sole survivor, Julio Cervantes. They claim none of the victims were warned of the incoming impact. They are calling for a thorough investigation into the alleged prior issues with the ship Dolly before the collision. The owner and manager of the ship has filed a court petition trying to limit their liability for the deadly disaster. Attorneys for the families say the law being cited is archaic.
The Limitation of Liability Act was passed 173 years ago in 1851. That's about 20 years before Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. And yet it is being invoked today, in this case in 2024, to not only attempt to limit, but eliminate compensation to these families.
This afternoon, we did receive a statement for a spokesperson for the ship manager. They say that they extend their sympathies to these families, but because right now there are so many ongoing investigations, they say it would be inappropriate to comment.
The FBI has opened a criminal investigation into the collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. Federal officials want to know if the crew was aware that the cargo ship that rammed the bridge last month had been malfunctioning before it left port. Mayday calls before the crash said that the ship had lost power. 6 road workers on the bridge were killed, and a 4th body was recovered yesterday. So I want to bring in Nicole Sganga now. She's following the investigation for us from Washington. So let's just start off with, Nicole, what more do we know about this?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, authorities at the scene of the Francis Scott Key Bridge wreckage recovered the body of another missing victim yesterday. And at the request of the family, authorities are not releasing that victim's name at this time. But we know, of course, 6 are presumed dead, all construction workers who were filling potholes on the bridge when it went down. Now, yesterday's discovery brings the total to 4 bodies recovered so far, 2 more unaccounted for. And this week, we're also learning the FBI has opened an investigation that will evaluate, as you mentioned, in part whether any crew members knew the vessel had systems problems prior to leaving the port, according to U.S. officials familiar with the matter. Now, that investigation is in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland, other agencies like the U.S. Coast Guard, which is leading the response efforts in the channel of the Patapsco River, will support the probe with any other information it needs. Separately, we know that the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, has been evaluating all of the events leading up to the moment that massive container ship lost power while leaving the port of Baltimore and slammed into one of the bridge's main support beams. That investigation really focused on engine room equipment. And Hyundai, the equipment's manufacturer, has sent employees to the Dolly ship to help download data from electrical power system there and look at the circuit breakers. And that independent investigation got underway in the hours after the incident. And we expect some preliminary findings in a couple of weeks, but a full readout of what happened, well, the NTSB says that could take months, if not years.
Oh, wow. Anne-Marie? All right, Nicole, thank you very much.
Parenting hack. I got my kid to love learning math, and all it took was letting them play a game. Try Adapted Mind, the monster.
Tonight, the FBI continues its criminal investigation into the Baltimore Bridge collapse.
The agency launching the probe to find out what the cargo ship's crew knew leading up to its crash into the bridge. It comes as the body of the 4th missing construction worker is recovered. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
Photos from the Washington Post capturing FBI agents climbing up the side of the massive container ship Dolly, executing a search warrant. The ship still trapped in the wreckage of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, a month after the ship crashed into the bridge at 1:30 a.m. Late Monday, word that a 4th body has been recovered. Law enforcement sources tell NBC News the FBI is focused on whether any member of the crew had prior knowledge of the ship's mechanical problems that would make it unsafe. Maritime law attorney James Power.
I understand a crew's still aboard, so they'll interview the crew. They'll probably, I would assume, coordinate with the notes of the Coast Guard and the NTSB for any investigations.
The NTSB tells NBC News its investigators are looking into reports that alarms were going off on the ship while it was still in port, suggesting a potential power problem before the ship left port.
They needed the assistance of Hyundai, who is the manufacturer of equipment in the engine room, to download data from the electrical power system and look at the circuit breakers.
Attorneys for 2 of the bridge repair workers who died and 1 survivor say the men were sitting in their cars on a break when they were suddenly thrown into the water below without warning. 2 remain missing.
Baltimore has temporarily lost a bridge, but 6 families have permanently lost irreplaceable loved ones.
The mayor of Baltimore now promising legal action against the ship's owner, the manufacturer, and operator. But the owner and manager have already invoked a law dating back to 1851 that limits their liability only to the value of the damaged ship, not the victims' families or the destroyed bridge.
This law was used to protect the owner of the Titanic. That's how ridiculous this is.
And that was Tom Costello reporting. There is an exception to that 173-year-old law, and that's if the owner knew